Good afternoon.
Hello, Will.
Dan, how do I call it? Professor King?
Just generally go by Daniel.
Keen. All right, Daniel. All right, welcome.
Unless you're my mom, then you call me Danny.
Or when you're in trouble, you get the full name, right?
Of course. Yeah, I've heard that once or twice.
Yes. So I think I mentioned about this podcast and wanted to invite you. I think it was a long time ago. You had some event at Smallman Theater in Millville. I don't know. Was it before COVID? I don't know. I forgot.
Yeah, I remember vaguely the conversation, but details are increasingly lost on me, particularly in that time period.
Right. Yeah. And I think Dan, when I talked to you, when I mentioned that you are the president of the board for NSR.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Which fine print NSR is pretty much not pretty much is Storyberg's fiscal sponsor. So you're my boss. Okay.
Wow, that took a turn. I don't know about that. I have been on the board with New Sun Rising for, 7-8 years.
Mm-hmm.
In January, I fell off as I had been the board chair for 2 years.
Okay.
And the work they do in fiscal sponsorship is really critical for the region. And it's been fun to see all these exciting projects emerge and have a pathway to pretty quick funding and all that organizational stuff that, often becomes a really big challenge for an early stage organization.
Yep.
It's been fun to see that.
That
ecosystem grow.
Yeah, which is the case for Storyberg. We are so grateful to have NSR, guiding us, through this new space for me, from the for-profit space to a non-profit.
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite a steep learning curve.
Yeah, I can appreciate that.
From knowledge, from the politics, from the fundraising, the grant making, all that stuff. We just stuff. But we're going to circle back to the NSR. But now I'd like to talk to you first about who you are. How did you get here?
Yeah.
And I think even before that, let me show to the audience where you live right now, right? So I'm showing the audience right now the map of Beaver County.
Okay.
Right. So Beaver County is about 30 minutes away, probably driving.
Roughly.
Okay. So
depending on traffic.
Of course. It's
and weather.
I think. My son just told me earlier that we live in Squirrel Hill, and then he went to Carson, which is outside, and it took him almost 30 minutes.
You never quite know.
Right. So how long have you lived in Butler County? How long have you lived? Yeah.
2011, moved there from Central Florida, of all places.
Okay.
My wife grew up in Beaver County.
Okay.
And, so we're approaching almost 15 years in Aliquippa. Is where I live.
Yep. So you are right now you are the founder and the executive director for RiverWise.
Yes.
So why RiverWise? What prompted you? What made you like, I'm going to do this?
Yeah. Oh, a lot of things. This is Storyberg, so I'll start by telling a bit of a story. So my background is actually in higher education.
Mm-hmm.
I was a professor of rhetoric and philosophy of communication, actually really interested in stories, in communication, and was studying the idea of hope and how that embodies itself in the life of a community. I was living in Central Florida, of all places, and teaching at a place called Stetson University, and then studying communities and community formation and community hope. And my kids didn't know their grandparents. It's like this really weird juxtaposition between my professional identity and the things that I was building into the life of my family. And so for a whole lot of reasons, after a lot of struggle, a lot of conversation, we decided in 2011 that we were going to step away from that and move back to Beaver County. And I'm skipping over a whole bunch of chapters of this story, but really we wanted to lean into hyper-local community formation, community and economic development. We wanted to be a part of what we perceived to be a kind of rebirth of community in not only Aliquippa, but more broadly in Beaver County. So that's what brought us I now say home. I grew up in north central Pennsylvania in Clearfield County, so a little further afield.
Okay.
But yeah, 2011, that brought us back.
Okay. So you mentioned about rebirth. Why? Why does it require a rebirth? So what happened before? What's the background story on that?
Yeah, so I wasn't around for a lot of the kind of the iconic story of collapse that is very, very evident in Pittsburgh and Southwest Pennsylvania's history. Aliquippa, the community I live, was once home to one of the largest steel mills on the planet, certainly in the United States, J&L Steel. At one point, 30,000 residents of Aliquippa. There were 30,000 residents of Aliquippa. It's rumored that in its heyday, J&L Steel was actually building a home per day in Aliquippa, and just rapid, growth, expansion. Really, the resourcing and growing of a self-serving community, a self-sufficient community. That was 30,000 residents at its heyday. 10,000 of those 30,000 residents were employed by that facility. So you think about that, 1 out of every 3 people, that includes men, women, and children, were tied to this economic engine, J&L Steel. And in the 80s, it went away almost overnight. And all kinds of reasons for that, some of which I feel like I might start to understand, a lot of which I don't. And it just decimated the community, much like it did, all of Southwestern Pennsylvania and certainly Pittsburgh proper. And, in many ways, the community has been reeling and recovering and rebirthing itself since that time.
Yeah. So it's been a while.
Yeah.
All right. And so, to be frank, how do they get by now? What is the replacement? What is the industry that replace the jobs?
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, and in many ways, even till this day, there's not a one-to-one replacement, right? I mean, we're talking about a massive global economic force, densely populated in a relatively small community. That goes away. You don't just put up a Sheetz and a hot dog stand and a grocery store and fix that. And so I think really the story of Beaver County, certainly of Southwestern Pennsylvania more broadly, and I would say really of Rust Belt America, has been trying to answer exactly that question. And you introduce globalization, you introduce mechanization, these kinds of forces, you can't recover from them with a simple set of answers. And so there still are not great answers. Now, we can, I suspect, talk about this. There has been more recently a resurgence of the petrochemical industry in Beaver County. We discovered this thing called the Marcellus Shale under our feet. And, Shell has built a $15 or so billion facility in the heart of our community that, depending on who you talk to, could be an answer to your question. But that's complicated too. So
right.
I don't know.
Yeah, everything has pros and cons. So depends on how you look at it, the perspective you look at it, and what the goal that you want to achieve at the end, right? So and you mentioned about the mechanization, industrialization, and things, the industry that we are working in, and now we have AI coming in, right? So. Yeah. We haven't solved this yet, but now we need to move on.
It might be fixing to get worse,
Right. Which is, I think, I don't know, personally, I think because I had Josh Lucas, in the beginning, my first guest for the year. And we were talking about the AI, but I think for me, it's an opportunity for a leap. Right? Rather than working on something, that has a hardware base, right? Probably for AI, the cost of entry probably is lower, at least for the part stuff. Of course, it's steep when you have to learn all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Right. But then there's an opportunity for, less than a mortar and brick kind of solution,
Well, I mean, you alluded to a version of this kind of conversation a few minutes ago. You said, that it's complicated. There's a lot of sides to all these things. I think the AI is absolutely a challenge. It's absolutely an opportunity, and it's everything in between, right? And we think about community formation and employers and employees and the identity of people, and we've got to figure out
education, the K-12 education. How are you going to incorporate AI? Either we ban them or we integrate them.
We got a lot of things to figure out as a human race. For sure.
And we're slow.
Well, yes, we are often way too slow.
Right. Okay. So, who do you collaborate with? Is REPUBLISHED like at the big kahuna with the inviting the smaller organization or similar organization to work with you, or are you actually working up with the bigger companies, or how does it work?
Yeah, so in order to answer that question a little bit, it's important to understand our mission. So we didn't always exactly use this language, but our current mission statement is, RiverWise exists to organize community voice and community power so that residents can exercise agency over the future of the communities they call home. Okay. And the idea there is, we want residents of Beaver County to be able to make important, impactful decisions about what their communities are, what they're becoming, how they're contending with both their history, but also these kinds of rapid changes that we've started to allude to here. And for a really long time, and in many ways connected to that industrial past and that rapid industrial decline, residents didn't know how to be a part of that agency-filled story. And so RiverWise emerged in 2018 really naively in a lot of respects, but also filled with hope and possibility. And we said, look, how can we get whoever wants to be more involved in shaping the future of the community, how can we get them better prepared to do that? And so because of that orientation, Will, we have intentionally purposed to work with any and everyone who shares that broader vision. That most often manifests itself in working with nonprofit leaders, nonprofit collaborations, civic organizations, churches, oftentimes entrepreneurs, people who are on the cusp of wanting to do something, sort of the agitated masses, right? But agitated and not necessarily sure where to direct that energy. And then we also work with municipalities and political kinds of entities as well. So we're in the center of all of that, and sometimes it's more of one and less of the other, and it kind of just depends on the project and the need and also the opportunity.
Right. So you want to give agencies to the community to tell their needs, to communicate what they want or their difficulty, their challenges. But who are the targeted audience that they need to speak to? And do they actually listen?
Yeah, audience is a really fascinating question, as you know, as a storyteller. Often when an initiative emerges in the life of the community, you have this core group of people who have an idea and an interest, and they sort of intuitively know there's a story here that wants to come to life, right? But I think they often don't necessarily understand who that audience is. And so they speak life to things and they bring stuff about in the life of the community. But we haven't seen, and I think relatively immature ecosystems like Beaver County often need to do a better job of segmenting and identifying different populations, different audiences who we can speak to in more focused and granular kind of ways. And so that's part of the rub. That's part of what we're trying to do with RiverWise is get more sophisticated in understanding who does care about these things, who's in a position to care about these kinds of community initiatives. How can we understand their needs and desires and interests and opportunities differently, and then architect opportunities that they can become a part of. So that was maybe a long roundabout non-answer. I'm not sure, but we're figuring those things out
Yeah, it's I think as a like storyboard, also we like to do storytelling. I think we are also the same conundrum, same problem, or like same dilemma, like a who needs to listen and who are actually listening, right? And we want the higher ups, the power that be, to listen, to persuade them to make decisions that that are aligned to our wish, right? But sometimes getting their attention is hard, right?
Sure.
And one thing that I'm that's really great. Let me show the audience again of your I'm showing here your website. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
This is like this is like a NPR quality.
Well, I'm going to put that on a T-shirt or maybe a tote bag, huh?
It's like wow. So
Well, this is a really interesting. I'm honored that you would land on this for a second, but all this is a shot of what's going on in the community, right?
Yeah.
Our communities are beautiful places. Even when they're struggling, they're beautiful places. And maybe most of all when they're struggling, they're beautiful places because we're forced to create and curate and aggregate beauty in a way that makes it so much more meaningful and alive. And so, we have foregrounded storytelling, community voice, community identity as part of everything we do. And in many ways, the stories tell themselves rather. And this is an image. We have a photo, a professional photographer, a professional documentarian, a professional journalist, a professional filmmaker, all embedded in our organization. This is one of the pictures of that our photographer has taken, and it's just showing back what's already present in the community.
Yeah. Also, I found here, you have is this like a annual report?
No, this is. So you've maybe heard of this guy named Joe Biden.
There's a picture of him somewhere.
There is.
There you go.
So early on in the Biden administration, he signed an executive order that aspired to direct a certain amount of funding to what was at the time called environmental justice communities.
Okay.
And one of the mechanisms that determined how those resources flowed into environmental justice communities was this thing called community benefits.
Okay.
Community benefits plans. We could get in the weeds really quickly here, and I don't know how useful it is for you or your listeners. But basically, if you're going to come into my community as a developer and make something, and you're going to ask the federal government to help fund that, the Biden administration said, you actually have to show that you're going to benefit the community that we're investing federal dollars in. And community benefits plans were the way that you demonstrated that was happening. And so Riverwise organized for a couple of years around this community benefits process. I really very much at the heart and soul of our organization, organizing community voice and power, trying to get residents better prepared to articulate what they actually wanted in the life of their community. And so this document is a reflection on all of that national, federal, political apparatus. It's also a very practical guide for how communities can better organize themselves so that they can lay claim to resources that, at least at the time, were made available for community kinds of projects.
Okay. So did it yield anything? Did any company or people with money actually come in?
Yeah, it's a great question, Will. I think a lot of people, in a lot of ways, are asking versions of that question right now.
And not just necessarily for the organization or for the Beaver County. I mean, I'm asking this in general for the allocated money, the allocated for this project for nationwide, right? I wonder if there's a collection of data that are available or can be pulled that show what is the yield.
Yeah. So, the unequivocal answer is yes. The data for that is, I would say, emerging, and emerging all the more rapidly in an environment where we're being forced to justify and validate that affirmative answer, right? So a couple times a week, probably I get some sort of an email blast that says, hey, help us show, what was actually accomplished in this previous administration and how these investments were starting to change the way you think about life in the community. And so you could go out and find databases of projects that were funded under this set of federal priorities, that were bringing things to life, in various communities. And I can, share some of those things with you, even as it relates to Beaver County. But I think more fundamentally, and this is where, for me, some of the really kind of gut-wrenching pieces of this conversation emerge, communities were starting to hope again. We're starting to dream again. We're starting to recognize themselves as potential sites of agency. They were starting to say, oh, wow, I don't just have to hope about things. There are actually mechanisms and laws and resources and pathways to bringing about a different kind of future for our communities. And that is, at the same time, the most exciting piece of what happened, and also, frankly, the most devastating piece. Particularly for low resource, and in this case, what were called environmental justice communities. They have been taught again and again and again and again and again not to hope. And there's almost nothing worse than trying to come back and start again after your hopes have been dashed.
Right.
And so, absolutely yes. And also, we're in a period of attrition and mourning for unrealized hopes that we got to figure out what to do with.
Right. Understand. So I think sometimes when we try to measure, again, like Storyburg is also on the same, almost similar path there, challenges and difficulty that when people want to measure the outcome, and the outcome is real, tangible, they want to say, okay, how many corporate dollars have been invested due to this, but we're not even there yet. Right now, like you said, give them hope. Like for Storyburg, when we invite people to tell about their story, most of them are hesitant. Most of them I don't know whether I can do it, right? But then when they get the opportunity, when they get the enough training, coaching, and positive reassurance, and then they're able to tell about their stories, and they're like, I can do it.
Yeah. Well, that's an outcome, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
That's a real thing in the real world.
Yes. Even like this, honestly, personally, I'm not a public speaker. I committed to my colleague Pamela Mong, the ringleader of this storytelling on stage in person. I told my stories, and it's like, okay, I can do it. Let me start a podcast.
Hey.
All right.
Good for you.
All right. So I think in everybody have this practice.
Sure.
Have this like a pat in the back, or it's like support, and yeah, you can do it. Tell your opinion. Tell your story. Tell what you want, what you need. And then not just to one person, to other people. And probably now they can hey, Mr. Mayor, I need blah blah blah. Hey, Mr. Senator, right?
Well, in one sense, your story is a story about stories. In another sense, your story is a story about human agency.
Right.
You're talking about your own journey to a podcast. There are all kinds of things that have to happen in order to give you the courage, the confidence, the willingness to take that kind of risk. We need communities full of those kinds of conditions, so that creative, thoughtful people, which we all are, can take risks and do interesting, exciting, innovative things in our community. And I fear that in this season, for a whole bunch of reasons, it's becoming harder and harder and harder to envision oneself taking those kinds of risks.
And risk which requires people to be more bold.
Yeah.
Right. And I think numbers, we have to win it by numbers, right? If we have more people with courage and agency to do this, and as long as they're united in what they want to talk, they're united in the goals and vision, it can make it happen. But because of the technology that we have, everybody everybody wants to be unique, right? Everybody has their own spin on things, right? Like, oh yeah, it's correct, but mine is a little bit different, so I'm going to do this way, right? Even though they share 98% of it, right? Because of the 2%, they want to have their own voice, which is good and bad. Again, like I said, many sentences ago, pros and cons, right? So it just makes it harder, right? Because in United, we're strong.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of dichotomy where, in one sense, never have we been more connected to one another. In another sense, never have we been, or rarely have we been farther apart.
Yeah. Social media.
Yeah.
Man, curse you.
Unless this podcast gets a whole bunch of listeners and goes viral.
Exactly. It's another thing. Who's listening? Who's the audience? What are the impacts?
Fair enough.
All right. So, eco districts. I've heard about this like many times over years, right? Mm-hmm. What is it? What are they? What's the purpose?
Yeah. So it can answer that question a lot of different ways. And again, I'm kind of walking through my mind trying to figure out what's useful in this conversation. So eco-districts as an idea and as a framework, I mean, ecodistricts.org at one point was an organization like Storyburg, a nonprofit organization out of Portland, Oregon, founded by a guy, I believe the founder, Rob Bennett. I know he was certainly the director when I was interfacing with the organization. In any case, they were really interested in looking at community systems, community organizations, communities. I'm going to use a big word for a second, but intentionally intersectionally. All right. So trying to understand the idea that communities aren't just an economy. They aren't just an education system. They aren't just a healthcare system. They aren't just a theater district. They're all of these things, and all of those things intersect with one another in very complicated kinds of ways. And one of the ideas, I think, at the heart of eco-district thinking was that we do damage to our communities when we don't understand those intersections. So eco-districts very intentionally privileged, I'm saying in the past tense because the organization no longer exists, ecodistricts.org.
Okay.
They have a bunch of sort of things that they spawned in the world that still do exist. One of the most notable of which is the Triborough Eco District here in greater Pittsburgh region. Anyhow, they foregrounded 6 different ideas: food, water, air, energy, mobility, and equity, and really wanted to build communities at the intersection of those 6 ideas and build communities that leaned into those quality of life areas and for those reasons, made healthier, richer, more vibrant, more ecologically sensible, sound, healthy communities. And there's a lot more that could be said, but it's a community and economic development model that centers those kinds of ideas. Early on in Riverwise's formation, we leaned into that construct, that organizing set of principles. A very close friend and actually the original founder of New Sun Rising, Brian Wolovich, walked with Riverwise for a year, walked alongside us as sort of a trainer, train the trainer kind of model, and helped us launch a handful of eco-district communities in Beaver County. COVID hit, a lot of things went sideways. Eventually, the national organization ceased operations, and so that's a legacy project, the distinctives of which we still lean into, but we're not actively organizing around that framework at present. But as I said, here in Southwest Pennsylvania, there is still a very, nationally, actually internationally significant Triborough Eco District. They have done some really fascinating and interesting things, being certified in that model, and really leading the way in hyper-local, sustainable community and economic development that really pays attention to those intersections and doesn't just focus on the economics of the conversation.
Okay, so let me ask you a question, which personally I dislike when someone asks me that.
You're not setting this up very well, Will.
So, is it scalable?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is a question I'm really I was going to say struggling. I wasn't struggling with. I'm wrestling with in my own work. Very, very often the kinds of things we're talking about and talking around emerge on the back of one or a handful of charismatic leaders who have a vision for something. And oftentimes that vision ends up being connected to their story and has a hard time being replicated, right? There are a ton of reasons for that. Many of those reasons are baked into the way this kind of work gets resourced and incentivized. And that could be a whole nother series of conversations that one might have at some point. But the problem of scale and replicability in our sector is significant. We don't invest in long-term solutions. We don't invest in the underlying infrastructure and the mechanisms that make scalable kinds of operations possible. We don't incentivize participation in the sector. None of my employees have health insurance, for instance. I don't have I buy health insurance, and it covers next to nothing. My employees don't have a retirement. You don't build and scale on the back of a system that doesn't incentivize longevity. So there are a lot of systemic reasons why something like we just talked about is hard to scale. And then there are also, a whole bunch of other kinds of reasons in our current moment. Political realities make that super challenging. But if you step back and you ask yourself, is it possible to envision a world that cares about environmental sustainability, that cares about community health, and that can do that at scale? The answer to that question, again, unequivocally has to be yes, right? It's a failure of imagination and leadership that makes it less possible. That's super sad to me. And sometimes it's wildly overwhelming.
Yeah.
And these are the things that my children are going to have to contend with. I'll continue to contend with them as long as I'm able.
Yeah.
But it's heavy kind of stuff.
Yeah. So when we ask ourselves, when we ask our organization, when we ask our allies, right, who are working in the space, why is that though? Why is that the case? Why is it hard? I mean, not that we know, in the short term, when we focus on we can't do it because the funding is renewed yearly, right? So there's no long term. But then, why they don't do that though? I mean, why is it so hard to get the long term funding? For example, is it trust issue? Is it what is it?
Yeah, you're gonna get me in trouble here, Will.
In general, we're not talking about anybody. It's just we are being abstract and philosophical.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, gosh, there are books and symposia and magazines written around these kinds of issues and these kinds of questions. I think it requires a kind of vision and a kind of principle.
And risk-taking.
And risk, yeah. And it's a little bit of a weird thing to say, hey, we invested in this organization for 10 years and they failed. In many ways, our incentive structure in the nonprofit sector is a little bit like when I would go to the movies as a kid, I would get this box of candy and it was all sugar, right? It would be different colors, but I would eat the sugar and I'd feel really good through the first, 40 minutes of the film. And then 50 minutes in, I'd be crashing and, half falling asleep. In many ways, the incentive structure in the nonprofit sector is like that, right? We want to get a short-term boost, sort of some quick outputs, but we need that long, slow, steady building. And, soup to nuts, it's not incentivized. This is one of the reasons I continue to be so deeply grateful for the Hillman Family Foundations. In 2018, they took a risk on our work. They funded us for a year-long pilot program. They came back and funded us for an additional 6 years After that, ended up investing north of $1 million in establishing Riverwise as an organization. And, I haven't done the calculations lately, but the ROI on that investment is, something on the order of 6, 7, 8x. Frankly, I've argued to Hillman that, we need another 7 or 21 years to do the kinds of things that are required in a place like Beaver County. And, understandably, those are conversations that happen, all over the sector. But they have been so kind and willing to make that slow, steady investment. And that's absolutely critical for changing the kind of systems that we're all living in.
Right. Yeah, I think it's... I think, when I asked that and when you give me your answers, there was like a deja vu moment, like I think I asked this question before, probably like, I don't know, many podcasts before, in the past. And I think I remember saying that, relating to where I used to work in the corporate world, that when we do our, when we did our, project management, right, or in the bigger scale, the company would set aside a tiny portion for a disruptive technology, something that probably 90% will not yield to anything, but it's a money that's worth investing, right? They know that it's probably just a burning money, but there could be a one unicorn will come up, right? But they know, but 99% of them will be waste. But somebody has to do it. Somebody has to take a risk. Yeah. It's like, okay, let's do this. Let's give them a chance. Give them, I don't know, whatever, right? In technology, probably it's, I don't know, probably like 3 years, 5 years. Like even that is not like a month, right? It's like you have to put in your money, you have to put in your resource for someone to try it, right? And I think, if I'm not mistaken, even in big companies right now, for example, like Google, they do have Google app, right? Sure. So every employees could pitch in, and like, I have this idea. Okay, if they're funded, they can work on it, right? And let's see. Probably turns into a Chrome extension or whatever.
Yeah, sure. Well, we have this saying at Riverwise, it's not terribly unique, but we've never failed at anything. And, that's a little bit of a joke, but it's also an orientation that we bring to the work. We try things and then we learn from what happens. And sometimes that could be framed as missing the mark or even failure. But understanding that innovation, community movement, the kind of long-term stuff that we're talking about here, that only happens through learning and through trying and through iteration, Right. And so, I would take and reframe the idea that, like, that's wasted money in Google. And I know you don't actually think it's wasted money. It's invested money. Right? I was a scholar at one point in my life, and as was my wife, and we used to lament that, man, I wrote like 18 pages today, and it's all garbage, and I got to throw it away and start again, right? I had to go through the work of creating the garbage to find the stuff that shouldn't be thrown away. If I'm not doing things in my life that require that kind of process, that makes me feel a certain way, and it's not good, right?
Yeah, right.
I want to be doing things that require risks, that require learning, that require failure. We have to incentivize that in our communities,
right?
Or we're going to keep getting more and more and more of the same.
It's like mining diamond, for example. Like 99.999% they're soil.
Yeah.
Right? But you have to do the work, right? Like knowing, the general area, and then you get your whatever carrots. Right?
Well, and,
there you go.
Back to the incentive structure and why we don't fund long-term stuff. And like many folks who do the kind of work that we do are beholden to folks who only want to hear about the diamonds, and who we become storytellers, forced always to talk about, never to raise the issue of the dirt, right? And
which is unfortunate, because like
it's devastating.
Again, I bring up again my experience in a for-profit, that like postmortem is great. We love it.
Yeah.
Right. We have a discussion of what went wrong and what we should have done and what we're going to do next.
Yeah.
Right. And this is like information. This is like knowledge that we gather and then we disseminate. We like make sure that everybody knows. Right. which is unheard of in nonprofit.
Yeah.
Like when they created conference, they're so happy. Oh, we invested blah 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 million of dollars to invite blah 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 people into the city, blah, blah, blah. And then what? Where's the So
proud to tell you that so Riverwise just finished up the second year of a project. You've heard of East Palestine, the Norfolk Southern, Norfolk Southern train derailment. That happened 600 feet from the Beaver County line. 30 more seconds on that rail, and this would have been the Beaver County train derailment. So we have followed very carefully residents for 2 years now, and have built community documentary. Piece by piece, we've been building that work. We just finished the second year of that project, and are getting ready to start a third. Next week, we have a postmortem.
Yay.
About year 2 of that project. We're going to come together and we're going to talk about, where we got it right, and where things fell apart, and what we need to do differently, and trying to build some of those learnings and really processes. We have a guy on our team, Tyler Schaub, our project manager, and he's helping us to build project management processes into every layer of the organization. So
yeah, wonderful.
It's happening.
If you need a consultant, hire. Hey,
there you go. Man, I couldn't have even asked for a better plug.
Yeah, so I think it's great. Sometimes, sometimes I'm disappointed. For example, I don't know. I'm just because you just mentioned the eco districts in Oregon no longer exist. Okay, so I was like, why? What happened? What could have been fixed, or is it just COVID? Apparently COVID, or what's going on, right? So always, in my brain, when there's an organization, there's something. And last year there was, or probably in the year, I don't know, this $600 million investment to be invested here in downtown Pittsburgh, blah blah. It's okay. I wish if it fails, right? I like to see the postmortem.
Yeah.
The amount of money that is that's promised, or a vision, that requires postmortem if it fails, if it's not happening, right?
Yeah.
So
we need a different vision for what counts as a good leader in order for that sort of thing to happen. Yeah. As a leader, I've actually for a number of years I wrote a bi-weekly column in the Beaver County Times called Community Matters. And I would often talk about the courage to fail publicly.
Wonderful.
And, there are days when I'm sure I haven't gotten that right, but I've been careful to discipline myself and surround myself with people who are okay with doing something bold enough to produce failure. And there are times when, that's certainly happened.
Yeah.
And I talk about it. And there are things we get wrong all the time.
Yeah. You have to value it as a learning.
Well, we have to value it as a culture, right? We expect leaders, and particularly leaders in the nonprofit sector, to be, prophets or visionaries, or fortune tellers or something, and to talk about their failure is seen as sort of a deep deficiency. I want to surround myself with people who understand their failures. I want to align myself with people who are willing to say, this didn't work, and I know why it didn't work. I'm going to do something different.
Right.
And I have the courage to explain to you publicly that I was bold enough to do that. We just don't, culturally, that's not, it's not a story that gets told very often, unfortunately.
Right. And probably if it's told, then they get punished for it. Yeah. Right? They said, then I'm not going to give you money anymore because you failed. Right. As opposed to, now you learn and now you know what to do. And I like what you said, what you're going to do, right? Your future plan.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess, is it probably because they're, what do they call it? Dozen in a dozen? Dime in a dozen, right? Because there's so many choices, right? There's so many organizations, profit and for-profit alike, right? There's so many things, right? And like a venture capitalist, probably they're just looking for which one is going to pop up, which one is going to be the next unicorn, which one is going to hit whatever, Well,
now I'm going to say some things that might feel a little prickly. it's way easier always to start over than to make long-term bets that could fail. So, oftentimes you see folks with resources who are investing in this kind of activity bouncing from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. Because the early stage, everybody wants to be in their first year of a relationship, right? Like that's the easy, fun, exciting part of a relationship.
All right.
Nobody wants to be in year 28. That's hard. That's slogging.
Just like dating and marriage.
I'm using that analogy very clearly. Yeah,
exactly.
There's a reason why puppy love is exciting, right? And funders get that too, right? So they bounce from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing that feels really good and feels really successful. And oftentimes, and this is the prickly part, I'm not sure that many of the folks who are able to resource this work have a really strong, robust vision for what it takes over time to create community change. And so we do the short-term thing.
Yeah.
And there's never a lack of things to fund on the short term.
All right. And
man, we didn't expect to have this conversation. We're into the ethics and philosophy of philanthropy. I'm going to get myself in trouble real quick here.
No, very good. Very good.
You can cut this part out, right?
So I think, right now we're talking about this nonprofit in general. All right. And I remember when I moved to Pittsburgh in 2010, and then I told my neighbor after I drop off my kid, at bus stop, right? And then they asked me, "Oh, what you gonna do here? You were in corporate, now you're here in Pittsburgh. What you gonna do?" It's like, probably I'm gonna do some nonprofit. And I know that one neighbor of mine she is a physician. It's like, well, I work for UPMC for a long time. They're the same, okay? It's just accounting. Their mentality, the way they do business is the same. It's just like how they shuffle the dollars. That's it. And then I was skeptical. Like, oh, really? There's blah, 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 blah. Now I see. Yeah.
Well, there are undoubtedly some similarity. I mean, I remember, 10 years or so ago when I realized that the NFL is actually a nonprofit.
Right.
Man, I didn't. Okay. I had to really, wrap my head around that for a minute. I am an entrepreneur who happens to, I've founded businesses as well, but in this case.
Your bookstores, right?
That's right,
Right.
But also, I'm an entrepreneur who's in the nonprofit space.
Yeah. So what would be your suggestions for people who are starting their nonprofits? They're in the early stage. Is there like a recipe for them to be successful? At least to get grants, and then to finally get probably general operating support in 2-3 years. I don't know.
Yeah, so I have a version of this conversation all the time with folks who want to start something. I often talk about experimentation and iteration. This idea that you need to go through a whole bunch of versions of what you think you want to accomplish on your way to sorting out what you're going to do. I also tell early stage organizations that they have to be able to demonstrate their willingness and ability to do the thing without funding if they really want to make a case. Often, this isn't always the case, but if they want to make the case for more substantial funding to do this long term. So when when Riverwise finally launched, there were 4 or 5 years of sweat equity that had gone into making a case for the organization. It wasn't called Riverwise. We were doing all kinds of community events and organizing community stakeholders and proof of concept kind of stuff, early prototyping, failing forward, failing fast. I see a lot of early nonprofit folks or folks who want to get in the nonprofit sector who feel like they have to build the Titanic in order to get funding. And I'm like, no, just like swim across the bathtub for a second, and see how that goes. And then try again. And, so incremental growth, I think is critically important. But then also collaboration, learning from folks who've done similar sorts of things. There are very few new ideas. We spend a lot of time and energy recreating the wheel in this sector.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes that's fine. Often it's doomed, and we could save ourselves some hassle by paying attention to what's going on around us.
Right.
So I don't know. Those are a handful of things. I'm sure there are a whole bunch more, but
right.
Let's start maybe.
And collaboration is key, but sometimes it's like a double-edged sword, right? If you have a cool idea, but it's out of the box solution or whatever, like a vanity idea probably, and then you collaborate with other people who are bigger, and then they see the value, and they see, I can do it myself.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, thank you for your collaborations, and then suddenly, several months down the line, it's like, oh, you're doing,
Yeah, and that happens in our sector all the time.
Yeah, and unfortunately for nonprofit, there's no IP. I mean, it's a public owned, right?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
That's a tough one.
Particularly when the entity who is co-opting your idea might be bigger or
and
better resourced, better loved. Yeah, and we've experienced those kinds of things to varying degrees. That's a tough one.
It's a tough one. Yeah, and again, it's similar to the for-profit. It's just not non-profit, but every entity is, right?
Yeah.
So how do people work in the equity and the marginalized population spaces these days?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, we're obviously having this conversation, with the backdrop of a dramatically changed federal environment. We're in a second Trump presidency. There's been a cultural and political and policy backlash against, perceived excesses, and in many ways, organizations like ours are bearing the brunt of some of that fight. I just said that sentence, and I want to be super careful. I'm not oppressed in this moment. I don't feel personally like I have much right to claim any of the pain or suffering that's happening in 2025 as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion. And so I just, there are folks in our sector who are deeply suffering as a result of what's happening in this moment. And though I'm talking about these issues, and I'll talk about how they affect, bottom lines and dollars and things like that as well, I recognize that I'm having this conversation from a very privileged position. So there's a lot of code switching that's happening in this moment, and some of that is entirely sensible and appropriate. I mean, we always describe things in different ways dependent upon our context. So, that's one thing that's happening. There are shifting priorities that are happening. There's attrition that's happening, things that one was doing at one point that they no longer are. That's how some people are moving in this space. There are coalitions and new resources that are being uncovered and tapped in this moment that in some ways I think is good. Folks are emerging to fund work that they weren't funding in the past. We had someone come on in off the street I had never met before in my life last week and say, I want to donate to your organization, made a substantial donation because of what's going on in the world right now. That's the way some organizations are. I need like 95 more of those people by the end of the next quarter. So like there's it's limited, but all those kinds of ways people are doing this work. Some are doing it very vocally and vociferously, right? Like they're leaning in all the more, and kudos to them, and thank God that they are in a position to be able to do that. There's no single response to that question. There's as many responses as there are organizations.
Yeah, probably if we have to use one word, probably just like hustling.
Yeah.
Just make it work.
Well,
Yeah.
on some level, this happens. This happened. I'm not equating what happened with the last presidential transition and right now, because they're very, very different.
Yep.
But, this happens on some degree with every major political shift, right?
Of course.
Whether at the federal or even, state or local level. Like, our sector is trained to be a chameleon, right? And so in some ways, like, we're poised for that. The thing that's going on here is, a chameleon is the same animal who has to change colors. We're talking about going from a chameleon to a spaceship or something. Like, it's a very,
changing the habitat completely.
That's right. So radically different kind of, diametrically opposed kind of situation. And I think one of the things that's really challenging about this environment is that so many of our organizations, when I say our, I mean, the social sector, we're incentivized to do precisely the thing that is being disincentivized in this moment. So it's not just that there was like a bunch of stuff happening that needs to be reframed. It's like there's a bunch of stuff that was being incentivized. It's exactly the wrong stuff. And now, that's a very different and even harder kind of equation to solve for.
Yeah. And I'm thinking right now whether it's the same or not, but let me just ask. Let me just put it out there. Like in different industry, the for-profit industry, usually when there's a earthquake happening, in the environment, they do a lot of merchant acquisition, like a let's join force, right? You mentioned about coalition, but is it common, or, the way I see that it's rare, but I wonder, is it possible for nonprofit organization to merge, to create a single entity as opposed to just coalition of many different entities? Yeah. Actually, like, hey, you're sharing, the same, let's due to the funding, whatever, usually for the for-profit, because of the cutback, then they say, okay, let's share, that's the easy one. Let's share the IT department. Let's share the HR department. Let's share,
It's certainly possible. I think our sector often lacks an imagination for this kind of stuff.
Or too much ego, because they have this idea, this is what my work should be, right? And the founder's complex, right?
Yeah. Certainly the ego. I would also say the incentive structure, right? Like, philanthropy has a harder time wrapping its head around the kind of thing we're flirting with talking about right now. Then, founder starts this organization and does their own thing, and it's an easier story to pitch sometimes. But yeah, this happens. This can happen. Riverwise, in our ongoing partnership with New Sun Rising, has done versions of this kind of thing. Throughout this past year, we shared 2 staff members. So I had a full-time environmental justice community coordinator hired, paid for by Riverwise. New Sun Rising had a full-time environmental justice project manager hired and paid for by New Sun Rising. And we worked on stuff together, and they shared their time across 2 different organizations. So we've experimented with the boundaries there. I think in this season, depending on how long and how severe challenges to the sector persist, the kind of stuff you're describing is going to become necessary. There will be attrition, there will be contraction. It's already happening. And for some organizations, it might be the only means for survival.
Right. So, in general, but then, these days, this environment makes it even harder. But how can a nonprofit organization make long-term commitment to the community that they're serving, but it's hard for them to make a long-term operations because they have money only on an annual basis? Then how can they do that? Because oftentimes that the community just gets disappointed, like, oh, here we go again, another organization to work with, and I'm not sure if they're going to be around next year.
Yeah. It's exactly the right question. I wish there was a really good answer. I will tell you, and I'm happy to tell anybody at any point in time what this number is, but Riverwise, as of this week, has like 10.25 months of operational runway So if I look and see what it costs us a month to operate, and I look at what's in our bank account and what we can actually spend in 10.25 months, that number's zero unless we keep raising funds. In the nonprofit sector, that number being 10.25 is like wildly luxurious. That's disgusting. That we're building the fabric of our humanity on the back of 10.25 months of certainty. It's no wonder our communities are struggling, right? I have 10.25 months of hope that I can pour into my community before it all falls apart. Like, that's twisted stuff, right?
Yeah.
Most organizations are more like 3 or 4 months. Okay, so how do we operate in the sector? Well, it's a crazy balancing act, and it is often, the reality is, it's projecting a kind of hope and longevity that isn't actually merited by data and dollars, you know? So, you know, there are many of us in the sector, and Riverwise, you know, we have been unusually successful as an early stage organization. I'm super grateful for that. And, you know, as I said, a lot of that is connected to Hillman's commitment. We were able to get some federal dollars in the door. You know, we've been in a generally privileged position, and it's still not good. But many in the sector they're sharing certainty that doesn't actually, I mean, they're sharing publicly things that, they're not lying, you know, they're projecting hopeful possibility, and then they're scrambling on the back end to figure out how to make it work. But then they're also paying their staff, you know, $12 an hour, you know, whatever. You know, so it's
too low for their,
you
know, standard.
Man, we keep coming back to this this funding question. It's almost like it's important, you know.
It's the livelihood or the I don't know, right? So yes, it's tough. Again, you can see the pain from the community perspective, right? I mean, it's like even at this university level, right? Project can come and can go, right? Even though with the backing of universities or with the research institution, whatever, because you know the grant can be pulled out, the grant can be canceled, the grant can be not renewed, and it's done.
Well,
right, and people have, even though in the beginning of the project, probably they get this visions, the founder's vision, okay, in year 3 we're gonna do this, in year 5 we're gonna do this, and then year whatever we're gonna take off, right? And then now it's like year 18 months, right?
Yeah. It's no good way to build humanity. And that's what we're doing. We're building humanity out of bubble gum and duct tape often.
Right. So, yeah. And thank goodness for nonprofits. We are the stopgap organizations, right? And that's what we are here for.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I know you're not a fortune teller, but what can you tell of where we're going to be X number of years from now? Pittsburgh as a region, Pittsburgh, Southwestern Pennsylvania in general.
X, man, you're putting all the burden of filling in what that X means. You're putting on my shoulders.
It depends on you. However you want to answer it. 18 months, 18 years, whatever. Considering what we all just said. This,
I mean, I'm generally a hopeful person.
We have to be, right?
Well, it's a discipline.
Yeah.
And there are days that it's absolutely the right thing to do, and then there are days that lament is worth leaning into as well. I find myself vacillating a bit these days. But, when I look around what I know of Southwestern Pennsylvania, what I know more particularly of my own community in Beaver County, I'm deeply hopeful about the things that I see. I see residents who are fed up in a good way, productive frustration, but who are not just operating with misdirected anger or undirected anger. They're starting to direct that at things that are productive. I see coalitions forming. I see organizations emerging. I see competency, or what we call in our sector capacity, growing with every passing month. Slowly, I'm seeing more and more leaders rise up to bring those things to life. And I think we're at, we're at a bit of a tipping point. My father-in-law uses the analogy like a 747 barreling down the runway. It's like at some point that, that airplane gets to the point where it's got to do one of two things. It's either going to take off or it's going to crash and burn, right? And there are no, there are no in-betweens. In some ways, the communities that I work in with, I think we're at that place. I'm hopeful that, we will soar and that the conditions have been created to make that possible. We've started to talk about, I've started to mess with this idea internally. I'm going to be 50 in 18 months or so. And I'm already sort of thinking about, I tend to have sort of like more of a morbid personality. I think about the end of life probably more than the beginning of life. It's just how I was built. And so I think about legacy, and I think about succession, and I think about longevity. And I'm toying with this idea of starting something at Riverwise called Future Shade. And there's this quote, plant a tree under whose shade you won't sit. And really starting to think about the long game. Like, how do we invest, despite the incentive structure within our sector, how do we invest in things that will bear fruit that we never have the opportunity to taste? I'm thinking more and more and more about that. I think if we can incentivize that in the sector, if we can rise up leaders who are willing to do that sort of thing, the future is super hopeful. I also think, more broadly, culturally, politically, in the arc of human history, I tell my children, I have a 22-year-old, two 18-year-olds, their birthday was yesterday, twins, and a 10-year-old. I tell them that when the history books are written, these 20 years that you've just lived as a child, they will be a hinge on which a major piece of the human story has swung. We're in a time of rapid transition, a time of rapid upheaval. The things that we've experienced together from, at least 9/11 forward are significant. And the dis-ease that we feel as communities is not accidental, right? It's not just, I don't know where that came from. Like, there are things happening in the world that are bringing that to life.
Yeah.
We're in this moment where we have the ability and opportunity productively to respond to that. I think we will. Question mark. I hope we will. I'm going to do what I can to bring that about. I hope that I'm creating children and leaders who will do the same. If that happens, I'm super bullish on Southwestern Pennsylvania.
Wonderful. We need more people like you in Southwestern Pennsylvania.
Well, and you too, Will.
It's great talking to you, and really appreciate your presence and your wisdom and your answers.
Delighted to do it.
All right, great.
Appreciate
Thank you
it.
very much.
Thank you, Will.